Hey everyone. So today we are going to be discussing world Englishes. So let's start getting into what world Englishes are. So here's just some background info for you guys. So world Englishes refers to the differences that occur in the language from the different contexts that it is used in. These varieties are identified by their history, background, function, and influence. So English is obviously spoken all around the world, and the information that goes into what English is in those parts of the world are determined what world Englishes are. So, world Englishes are created by them being immersed in different languages or by just people that speak a different dialect of English, such as we use words in our everyday English in the United States that they don't in, say, Britain, and vice versa. And it all depends on where they're being used, the history of the words that are being used, and the influence, so how often those words are being used. Social needs are one of the main factors for why world languages exist. Language develops to fit the needs of the society that it is used in. So the fact that different places around the world that use English as one of its main languages, or maybe even not as a main language, those social needs to get points across are the reason that world languages exist. The need to help somebody understand what you're saying, and those words that can help do that are different for different types of English. World English was created because language has to adapt to its surroundings and the words and phrases that are used in that area. An example of this is a store selling alcoholic beverages in America is called a liquor store, but in Britain they are called off license, derived from British law. So that's just an example of Britain and America both speak English, but we have different words to denote different meanings of things. And this is true across all different types of languages. English is no exception. But as we're going to get into, English is one of the main ones just because English at this point in time is the most spoken language in the world. And this picture just gives you an idea of all of the different types of English that are spoken around the world. There's main branches of English, such as American English, British English, South Asian, Standard English, and then all of those have little branches that go off of them. So it's really just continually growing and always being added to as well. And then just some more info for you guys. Language becomes prominent because of the power that they hold. English became such a major language because of the political and military power of its speakers. So when English first started taking hold, it was because the people that spoke it were very strong military and political powers. And so to deal with those powers, people had to start learning and becoming familiar with the language of English. English does not have a central governing body like many of its companions, uh, uh, like Spanish and French. This is one of the reasons it has so many different flavors. So, this is the idea that a lot of other languages, such as Spanish and French, they have a governing body that gets to decide what goes into making the language of English, and English just doesn't have that. So, a lot more gets added into the language of English, and many believe that that's one of the reasons that it's surviving and thriving like it is. There is not one single correct form of English that speakers should try and follow. Each variety has its own validity and history. So, this is saying that just because you're from America doesn't mean that your American English is better than the English of somebody from, say, Britain. Some worry that this adaptation will cause a break into multiple languages, but with the use of the internet and media across national borders and the fact that we change the way we speak when it is needed, this is unlikely. However, it is still something to think about. So, this is just the idea that people are afraid that, like a lot of other languages, like Latin was a world power at one point as a language, they're afraid that eventually English will fall apart as well. But with the research that I did, it said that um, because of the way that the internet works and the way that media can cross national borders, just like someone in Britain can speak to someone in America instantaneously, and all over the world, this is true, that they don't see that ever really happening to English because of the era that it came to power, pretty much. All right, so let's move this down a little bit for you real quick. Now we're going to talk about the three concentric circles. All right, so three concentric circles came from a man named Braj Kachru, and he formally actually introduced the term World Englishes in 1984, and he created the concentric circle model. So what it is it's the idea that there's an inner circle, an outer circle, and then an extended circle, and we're going to talk about all three. So the inner circle is countries where English is used as the primary language, such as America, Canada, Australia. The outer circle, which is the second circle that you see there, English usage has some colonial history or used daily as the language for education and government. So it's not used daily by its citizens, and it's not the main language of the country, such as India and the Philippines, but it is used for education and for political parties and stuff like that. And then the last one is called the expanding circle, and I know you can't see the name of it right there, but this is English is rarely used as a home language. Often it is learned in these places for international communications such as business or political. So if you think about Japan and China, they pump out so much of the business that goes on around the world, and those are one of those countries that they just need English at times for communicating across borders for business or political needs. So this is a quote from a little bit of my research that I found. It says the above interaction regarding wedding schema between K and C1 shows that considerable variations exist between their respective cultures regarding the conceptualization of wedding hall and the conventional times and venues for the wedding event, and whether a banquet or a very brief meal is provided to the guests. So let me just pull up what this is kind of talking about here. And so it's actually this quote right here. All right, so what this study sought to look at was students from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds that were asked to complete free responses on a number of predetermined words. So they were just given a word, and then they were asked to use their schema and come up with what they thought that word meant. And what they found was that students from different world Englishes that were from different places around the world speaking English had different meanings for different words. So this specific example, you can see this conversation here. Yeah, wedding. Activities include a male and female getting together, becoming one family. It's a symbolic thing, I guess. And then if you go down a little bit further, depending on how big, so then on the special day, the building can be fully booked. Yeah, you have to find different places. So within that building, there's a restaurant. After the wedding ceremony, we go upstairs or downstairs where the restaurant is. So this just gives you the idea that in America, a wedding is something very different than it is in Korea. And this is just one example of words that can mean entirely different things even though you're speaking the same language. And this is a big idea when it comes to world Englishes. All right, so now we're going to get into the history of world Englishes. Might have to move that a little bit. And we'll move it over here. All right, so again, that name has already popped up once, Braj Kachru. He coined the term World Englishes in 1984 after a paper that he wrote. Uh, After a paper that he wrote in 1965, a journal article titled The Indianness in Indian English, which hinted at the idea of world Englishes by discussing how India had its own variation of English different from American or Britain. So in 1965, he published this article, and it dove into the fact that even though he was speaking English, it was a different variation from English, from American and Britain English. And he hadn't even come up with the term World Englishes at this point. He was just pointing out that even though they're speaking the same language, it's a almost a different format of that language. He argues that a community acquires nativeness in English speaking status as it begins to use English in more and more social situations. So, a community needs nativeness in English speaking to be determined as using World English. All right, this was something that I came across in my research a bunch and I found it incredibly interesting. I wanted to add a slide on it, but it's the idea of lingua franca. So, Latin was a lingua franca at one point, and pretty much what a lingua franca is when it is adopted as a common language for those whose native languages are not the same. So, pretty much it means that it becomes a middleman. And that means that across the world it is used more than any other language. And for our time, that's English. Roughly 1 billion people speak English in the world right now. And when you think about it, that is honestly a super high number comparative to how many people there are in the world, especially since when you think of the number of countries that speak English solely, it's a very small percentage of the rest of the world, the rest of the population. And like I was saying, the native speakers such as America, Britain, Australia, that doesn't even come close to the whole number of people that speak English in the world. English has not always been the king of language. The British Empire, when it expanded, and the economic power of the United States uh, around the dawn of the century, led to the beginning of its reign as lingua franca. And that's when it exploded on the scene, and people just started using it across the world, and now it's the most dominating language in the world. Many believe that it will never end its reign as lingua franca. Others think that, just like Rome, it will have its final day in the sun. One interesting thing that I read, though, was the article discussed that the idea that eventually technology will lead us simply just to translate our native language into whatever is needed so that we won't have to know multiple languages, so that technology will get to the point that it'll instantaneously um, translate the language that we're speaking, so we don't have to worry about knowing multiple languages. All right, so this was another quote from my research that I found, and it says many reflect that learning about World English has redefined the purpose of language learning for them and opened their minds to the features found in different Englishes. So, this research studied students who were asked to write papers on a semester long World English course. And it was an attempt to help them realize how easily students go back to their native speaker norms. So, this is just the idea that um, we always go back to our norms. Like in America, we go back to speaking our norms, even though sometimes we adapt that language to get a point across to someone that might even be speaking the same language and we don't realize we're doing it. We always go back to those social norms. But I thought that this quote was really important to think about, um, just because you have to think about all of the things that go into your language. And just because you're speaking the same language doesn't mean that you're always going to understand the person that you're talking to. All right, so now we are going to get into why English dominates globally. In January 2020, the Oxford English Dictionary added 29 Nigerian English words to its pages. So this is a huge number of words if you don't know, and the fact that it was Nigerian English, it just makes it even that much more prominent. This validates the concentric circle model in that countries such as Nigeria in the outer circles are adding to the norms of English. So this is just saying that even countries in the outer circle, not even the ones in the inner circle like USA and Australia, are adding words to the normal words that we use every day in English. Words are not chosen based on how they should be used, but rather how they are being used. So this is saying that when the Oxford English Dictionary decides to put words on its pages, they're not saying that this word needs to be used. They are using media and research and finding out which words are already being used, and those are the words that they're adding to the pages. English allows for its continual growth, which is part of the reason it hasn't ceased its power as the king of the language world. So this is just saying that English is continually adding other words. There are some other languages that they're so strong in their foundational history that they don't want to adapt and change and add words to their dictionary. But English has never been afraid of that, and many believe that that's part of the reason why English is lingua franca and won't ever lose that mantle. English allows words from all languages, enabling it to thrive all over the world. I found this point to be really important. The fact that even English even takes words from other languages and still uses it in our language. We may adapt them at times, but sometimes we just pick up words from other languages and use them in English. So this was another quote that I found important. Used in culturally diverse communities, English has been adapted to meet the challenges of the complex identities created by globalization. The role of English is, therefore, fraught with linguicultural and rhetorical problems for which training programs must account. So this research came from a study on how the preparations of students needs to include the internalization of technical communication in English. So this is the idea that students, teacher candidates, business candidates are not being taught the role of English around the world and how important it is to understand that just because you come from America, your form of English is not the most important, and that people need to be trained on these rhetorical problems. All right, so I had a couple technical difficulties with this slide, but I just wanted to stick it in here. This is the slide about the English language learner strategy that I could use to teach this lesson. So, one of the things that I found most important is the idea that language has a lot of different things that go into it. And knowing that even in English, there's different dialects of that English, I think is a really important point. And one of the activities or the resources that I used actually touched on this. And the students were asked to create definitions and discuss their feelings about certain words. So I could give my students a set of words that I know in English have different meanings in different places. And then we could talk about the importance of that and the fact that when you're even conversing in your language or another language, you have to understand that even in that language, there's other meanings, multiple meanings to words and understandings that go along with that. So just because you're saying a word in English to somebody else that understands English, they may not have the same understanding that you do. Um, and I think that this is a really important point and something that is really important to drive home for English language learners. All right, so I found this video and I scroll through Facebook all the time and I come across really random videos. And I actually found this video before I ever even realized that I had this topic. It doesn't necessarily go along with my topic exactly, but I just think it's a really good video and it does talk about how even someone that's speaking the same language as you might even sound like he's not speaking the same language as you. So let's get into this video.
My own Glaswegian accent is considered amongst the least attractive in the UK, and I want to know why that is. To find out, I'm meeting Professor Jane Stuart Smith, who's been working at Glasgow University for the last 20 years. What have you found about Glaswegian in terms of how it's distinct from other regional dialects?
What has happened in English dialects is that there's been the loss of local dialect features, whereas the Glasgow dialect has become more distinct rather than less distinct. What we are interested in when we talk about phonetics is how we produce speech. Accents are produced with everybody that has fundamentally a very similar vocal tract. So traditional Glaswegian used to have a very retracted tongue root, but the settings of the vocal tract have changed in Glaswegian since the First World War. So they were more and now they're more
Why Glasgow and not like Edinburgh, for example?
There's something special about the city. In the early 1900s, Glasgow was described as the largest village in the world. These close-knit networks, which are so important for language. Linguistically, you've got this really, really interesting situation with the expression of identity. It's one way that people can fight back, because if they come from a deprived area, what can they do?
Oh, it's good to know that that sense of pride that Glaswegians have is not 100% hubris.
Jane has agreed to analyse the first series I ever presented for BBC Scotland. My name is Darren McGarvey, Loki the Scottish rapper to some, and I want to immerse you in the world that I grew up in.
Now, I liked this.
And I want to immerse you.
Immerse you.
Yeah.
But then...
You almost sound French when you try to do that.
Yes, because it's a UVLR.
All right, okay.
And would anybody say that saying re in French is bad or slang or ugly?
No.
No. You have a UVLR. You produce it in the same way as a French person, but it's not associated with loveliness.
Quite.
This is the important bit, and you really want people to listen to you.
A world defined by poverty.
A world defined by poverty. And this is what you're doing with your language. But you kind of take people unawares, because you say community, 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 and then community, where it's important. Society, society, responsibility. So whatever's happening in the planning of your speech, you are aligning the social, cultural importance of what you're saying to your audience, and it's getting the linguistic repertoire, which is needed at the time.
Yeah. I am often being told that class is no longer a thing, but language, more than any other area for me, is where it's most evident.
Various pieces of research, like language attitudes research, shows that as soon as we hear somebody, we make social judgments about them. And those social judgments have got nothing to do with actually what they're saying or how they say it, but rather it's the connection between certain speech styles with particular stereotypes. Accentism is like the last kind of prejudice, because people are still kind of allowed to use accent as a vehicle to make social judgments about other people.
Because it's class, and classes fall into the bottom of the current hierarchy of concerns.
Yes. Well, it's falling to the bottom because everybody's pretending it's not there. But as an RP, standard English speaker, I'm lucky because literally studies have shown that if I was to say something in my accent, people will believe it. Whereas if you were to say exactly the same thing in your accent, they wouldn't believe it. And it's scary, but it's been demonstrated again and again. Part of being middle class and being educated is the way you talk. You have to speak properly. And if you don't, that's a problem. So if you move socially, you've got to do something to your language. And if you're stuck socially, it's almost like it's a kind of prison.
I just think that video is super interesting, and I think the point that I found really interesting was the part when she discussed planning your speech. And it was that point when he talked about how he puts the T on the end of certain words when he knows that he's trying to get a point across to his audience. And I think that's really important to think about, how we change the words and even how we say them when we're trying to get a certain point across. And this is an idea of world Englishes and how we adapt ourselves to get certain points across. And that's crazy to me because we're literally speaking the exact same language, but at times it feels like a different one. So to conclude all of this, there isn't a single form of English that's greater than another. As I said, English is English, and there shouldn't be any prejudice against another kind of English just because there's a specific one that you speak. Just because we're from America doesn't mean that our English is better than the English of Australia or Britain or Canada. English is adapted with the help of other languages. So this is the idea that English gets a lot of its words from other languages, from the adaptations of words from other languages, and so English is not the end all be all of language. It is the lingua franca right now, but that doesn't mean that it's more important than any other language. And like I just said, English is the lingua franca of our time, and that's really important to think, just that it is the king of language at this point in time, probably for a very long time, probably at least for the rest of our lifetimes, for the rest of our children's lifetimes. It's probably not going away anytime soon, but you never know. Rome did fall. Students should be taught about English from around the world. I think it's a really important point, especially going into the ELL classroom, that these students need to know that their native language is important, but also that English can be different than just the English that they are learning in America. That English has so many different branches and its roots are incredibly deep and powerful, and they need to be taught about the variations of English and why all those variations are so important. So here is my works cited and the sources that I used to get my research and the video and everything like that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will be posting the discussion questions above the link. Thank you very much.